Step out of the vehicle. Now. The command cut through the late afternoon air like a clean break in silence, sharp enough to make a few nearby shoppers pause mid-step, their grocery bags hanging loosely at their sides, as if time itself had hesitated for just a second. Alicia Monroe kept both hands resting on the steering wheel, fingers steady, knuckles relaxed, her breath slow and measured as the fading sunlight reflected off the windshield in soft amber streaks. The parking lot stretched wide around her, rows of cars lined beneath tall metal lamps that hadn't yet flickered on, the hum of distant traffic blending with the faint rattle of a shopping cart rolling across uneven asphalt. She had pulled into the space less than 2 minutes ago, engine still warm, a reusable grocery bag folded neatly on the passenger seat. A simple stop between a long day and a quiet evening that now felt impossibly far away. "Ma'am," I said, "step out of the vehicle." The officer repeated, closer this time, his voice firmer, edged with impatience that didn't match the calm stillness of everything else around them. Alicia turned her head slightly, just enough to see the reflection of a badge glinting in the side mirror, the dark silhouette of a uniform standing rigid beside her door. There was no urgency in her movements as she unfastened her seatbelt, the soft click sounding louder than it should have in the heavy quiet. No resistance in the way she reached for the door handle. Only a quiet awareness settling deep in her chest, like something familiar, something she had learned long ago not to ignore. The door opened with a low creak, and the air outside felt cooler, carrying the faint scent of pavement and distant rain, even though the sky above remained clear and pale. She stepped out slowly, posture straight, eyes level, her expression composed in a way that didn't invite confrontation, but didn't surrender to it either. The officer studied her, gaze quick and dismissive, as if deciding who she was before a single word had been exchanged, his hand resting near his belt not out of necessity, but habit. "License and registration," he said, already looking past her, already assuming compliance without question. Alicia nodded once, a small, controlled motion, and reached back into the car, retrieving her wallet with careful precision, every movement deliberate. Every second stretching just enough to let the moment breathe. Around them, the world continued in fragments, an engine starting somewhere down the row, a car door slamming, a distant laugh. But here, in this narrow space between authority and assumption, everything felt suspended, as if the outcome had already been decided long before she arrived. She handed over her ID without a word, her gaze steady, not challenging, not apologetic, just present. The officer glanced down briefly, then back up at her, his expression unchanged, unimpressed, uninterested in what the card might actually mean. "You match a description," he said flatly, as if that explained everything, as if that justified the tension tightening the air between them. Alicia let the silence sit for a moment, not rushing to fill it, not offering more than what was required. Her voice, when it came calm and even, almost quiet against the low hum of the parking lot. "Then I suggest you verify it carefully." For a fraction of a second, something shifted in the officer's posture, not understanding, not yet, but a flicker of something unsettled, quickly buried beneath routine. He turned slightly, signaling to his partner across the hood of the car, and in that small gesture, the balance tilted further, the situation moving forward on a path neither of them had fully seen yet. Alicia stood still, hands relaxed at her sides, shoulders squared beneath the fading light, her reflection faintly visible in the car window beside her, calm, grounded, unshaken. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain who she was. Not yet. Instead, she watched, and waited, and let the moment unfold exactly as it chose to. Because somewhere beneath the surface of that ordinary parking lot, beneath the routine and the assumption and the quiet weight of authority, something irreversible had already begun. The officer walked a few steps away, speaking quietly into his radio, his words low and coded, but the tone carried enough weight to shift the atmosphere around them as another patrol car eased into the lot, tires crunching softly over scattered gravel, the second set of headlights cutting across Alicia's car in a pale wash of white that made the chrome trim gleam, and her reflection sharpened briefly against the glass before fading again. She remained where she stood, feet planted evenly on the asphalt, the faint warmth of the engine still radiating behind. Her legs, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, the kind of calm that did not come from ignorance but from years of learning when to speak and when to simply observe, and more importantly, when silence carried more authority than explanation. The first officer returned, her identification still in his hand, his thumb pressed against the edge of the card, as if holding onto it gave him control over the situation. His eyes scanning her again with a narrowed focus that did not match the information he had yet to fully process, and for a moment he seemed almost irritated by the absence of fear, as if he had expected something else, something louder, something easier to categorize. "Stay right here," he said, not a request, not even a warning, just a statement delivered with the expectation of obedience, and Alicia gave a small nod, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The difference subtle but real, her gaze drifting briefly across the parking lot where a mother guided a young child toward a shopping cart, where a man loaded bottled water into the back of a pickup truck, ordinary life continuing just feet away from a moment that was quietly tightening around her like an invisible frame. She had been here before, not in this exact place, not with these exact faces, but in the pattern, in the assumption, in the way a situation could be decided before facts were even considered, and years ago, she had learned that reacting too quickly only fed the narrative, already forming in someone else's mind. The second officer approached, taller, his expression more cautious, his eyes moving between Alicia and his partner as if trying to read a script that had not yet been fully written, and Alicia noticed the slight hesitation in his stance, the fraction of uncertainty that had not yet hardened into certainty, and she held on to that detail quietly, not as leverage, but as awareness. "What do we have?" the second officer asked, his voice lower, more measured, and the first officer exhaled through his nose before answering. "Possible match, still verifying." The words simple, but the implication already leaning toward conclusion rather than question. Alicia folded her hands loosely in front of her, not crossing her arms, not placing them behind her back, just resting them together in a neutral space that conveyed neither resistance nor compliance beyond what was necessary, her eyes lifting slightly to meet the second officer's gaze, calm, direct, and for a brief second, something passed between them, not recognition, not yet, but a pause, a small disruption in the flow of assumption. The wind shifted lightly across the lot, brushing against her jacket, carrying the distant hum of a passing semi-truck from the road beyond the store, the sound deep and steady, grounding, and she let it anchor her, a reminder that moments like this, no matter how tightly they closed in, were still part of something larger, something that moved forward whether or not anyone acknowledged it. The first officer turned back to her, his tone slightly sharper now, as if the presence of backup had solidified his position. "Do you know why you are being stopped?" And Alicia tilted her head just slightly, not in confusion, but in quiet consideration, her response measured, deliberate. "No, officer, I do not." Each word clear, even, carrying no edge, no challenge. Just the simple truth placed carefully between them. The officer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, as if her calm had complicated something he expected to be simple, and he glanced again at the identification in his hand, then back at her, still not fully seeing what was right in front of him, still choosing the version of events that fit the shape he had already formed. Behind them, the automatic doors of the grocery store slid open with a soft mechanical sigh, releasing a brief wash of cool air and fluorescent light that spilled onto the pavement before fading again, and in that flicker, Alicia's reflection appeared once more in the side window, steady, composed, unshaken, a quiet presence standing in the middle of a moment that was building towards something neither officer had yet understood, and she remained exactly as she was, not correcting them, not revealing anything beyond what had been asked, allowing the situation to move forward step by step, because sometimes the truth carried the most weight when it was allowed to arrive on its own. Officer Daniel Brooks shifted his weight slightly, the faint creak of his utility belt breaking the stillness as he studied Alicia Monroe with a more deliberate focus now, as if something about her composure had begun to resist the simple narrative he had already constructed in his mind, but instead of questioning it, he leaned further into it, his voice taking on a sharper edge that felt less about procedure and more about control. "Step over here," he said, gesturing toward the space between the two patrol cars where the flashing lights had begun to pulse in slow, alternating rhythms, red and blue reflections stretching across the asphalt like moving shadows, and Alicia followed without hesitation, her steps even, measured, her shoes making a soft, steady sound against the pavement that contrasted with the restless energy building around her. The second officer watched closely, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not with suspicion, but with a quiet attempt to understand, and Alicia caught that again, that small space where certainty had not fully taken root, and she held onto it without acknowledging it outwardly. Brooks circled slightly as she came to a stop, positioning himself in a way that suggested authority rather than necessity. His posture squared, his chin lifted just enough to reinforce the imbalance he believed was already established, and for a moment, he looked down at the identification still in his hand, then back at her, as if waiting for something that would confirm his expectations. But Alicia remained exactly as she was, calm, grounded, her gaze steady and unflinching, not confrontational, not submissive, simply present in a way that did not bend to the tension around her. "You are going to need to explain why you are here," he said, the phrasing oddly pointed for something so ordinary, and Alicia let a brief silence pass before responding, not rushing, not reacting, her voice even and clear. "I stopped to buy groceries." The simplicity of the answer hanging in the air longer than expected, almost out of place against the weight of the situation being constructed around it. Brooks exhaled slowly through his nose, clearly dissatisfied, his eyes scanning her again, searching for something else, something that would justify the escalation that had already begun, and when he did not find it, his expression tightened just slightly, a subtle shift that spoke more to frustration than discovery. Behind them, the second officer stepped closer, lowering his voice as he spoke to Brooks, but not enough to fully conceal the words. "Did dispatch confirm anything?" And Brooks shook his head once, short and dismissive, still checking, before turning his attention back to Alicia. His tone firmer now. "Turn around," he said, the words landing heavier than the ones before, not because of volume, but because of what they implied. Alicia did not move immediately, not out of defiance, but out of clarity, her eyes lifting slightly to meet his, and in that brief exchange, there was something unmistakable, not anger, not fear, but a quiet awareness of exactly where this moment was heading. And still, she did not raise her voice, did not argue, did not reveal anything beyond what had already been asked. "Officer," she said, calmly, her voice steady, grounded in something deeper than the situation itself. "I am cooperating, and I would like you to verify my identification before taking further action." Each word placed carefully, not as a challenge, but as a reminder of the line that was beginning to blur. Brooks paused for half a second, just long enough for the second officer to glance at him again, that same flicker of uncertainty returning. But it passed quickly, replaced by a more rigid stance as Brooks straightened slightly, his jaw setting, his decision already made before the verification had a chance to catch up. "Turn around," he repeated, more firmly this time, and Alicia slowly complied, not because she agreed, but because she understood, her movements controlled, deliberate, her hands remaining visible, her shoulders relaxed, the cool air brushing lightly against her skin as she faced away from them, the world narrowing into the sound of distant traffic, the low hum of the patrol cars, and the quiet rhythm of her own breathing. In the reflection of the nearest vehicle, her figure stood still, centered, framed by flashing lights that painted the scene in alternating color, and even there, in that distorted mirror of glass and motion, she looked composed, unshaken, a presence that did not match the role being assigned to her. And as Brooks stepped closer behind her, the space between assumption and reality grew thinner, stretched tight, moving toward a point neither of them had yet fully grasped, but one that was coming all the same. The air shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, as the faint metallic click of the patrol car door closing somewhere behind them echoed across the parking lot, sealing the moment into something more defined, something no longer uncertain but actively unfolding. And Alicia Monroe stood facing away, her hands still visible, her shoulders relaxed, the weight of the situation settling around her not as pressure, but as clarity, the kind that sharpened every sound, every movement, every detail, into something precise and undeniable. Officer Brooks moved closer, his presence now directly behind her, the faint scent of leather and cold air trailing with him as he spoke again, his voice firm, procedural, but carrying a layer of impatience that had grown with each passing second. Place your hands behind your back. And Alicia did not resist, did not hesitate, her arms moving slowly, deliberately, her fingers interlacing loosely as instructed, her breathing steady, her posture still upright, composed, the quiet strength in her stillness contrasting sharply with the tightening rhythm of the flashing lights that painted the ground in alternating red and blue. The second officer shifted slightly to the side, his gaze moving between Brooks and Alicia, and for a brief moment, his brow furrowed, as if something about the progression no longer aligned with what he had expected, and Alicia sensed that hesitation again, that small opening in the wall of assumption. But she did not turn, did not speak further, allowing the process to reveal itself step by step. "You are being detained pending verification," Brooks said, the words formal, almost rehearsed, but lacking the foundation they were meant to stand on, and Alicia's voice came quietly, evenly, not raised, not defensive, but clear enough to sit firmly in the space between them. "Officer, I understand your procedure, but I am advising you that this action is premature." The sentence measured, precise, not emotional, but grounded in something deeper than the moment itself, something built over years of understanding exactly where lines should be drawn. Brooks did not respond immediately, and in that half-second pause, the second officer glanced again at the identification still in Brooks's hand, his lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came, and the silence stretched just enough to carry weight before Brooks moved forward with his decision. The soft sound of standard issue restraints closing around Alicia's wrists marking a shift that could no longer be undone. Still, she did not tense, did not pull away, her hands remaining steady, her posture unchanged, her chin level, her gaze forward, and in the reflection of the patrol car window, the image was striking, not because of what was happening, but because of how she held herself within it. Composed, unbroken, present in a way that did not align with the role being forced upon her. A small group had begun to gather at a distance now, subtle at first, a couple pausing near their vehicles, a phone lifted slightly, not aggressively, not intrusively, but enough to capture the outline of a moment that felt out of place, and the quiet murmur of curiosity blended into the background noise, adding another layer to the scene without disrupting its center. Brooks stepped back slightly after, securing the restraints, his posture firm, his expression set, as if the act itself had confirmed his authority, and he gestured toward the patrol car with a brief motion of his hand. "You will come with us." And Alicia turned her head just slightly, not enough to break her stance, but enough for her voice to carry with calm precision. "Before we proceed, I am again requesting that you verify my identity through your system." Her words neither pleading nor confrontational, simply placed where they needed to be, like a final marker before a line was crossed. The second officer shifted again, this time more noticeably, his eyes flicking toward Brooks with a quiet urgency that had not been there before, but Brooks remained fixed, his decision already locked in place, and the moment moved forward, inch by inch, into territory that was no longer just about procedure, but about consequence. The wind picked up slightly, brushing across the lot, carrying the distant sound of a passing siren. From another street, faint and unrelated, yet echoing through the scene like a reminder of something larger, something beyond this narrow space of flashing lights and quiet tension, and Alicia Monroe, standing there in that controlled stillness, allowed the moment to continue exactly as it was unfolding, because she understood something they did not yet see, that the truth did not need to be forced into the present. It would arrive on its own, and when it did, it would not need to raise its voice to be heard. The rear door of the patrol car opened with a low mechanical thud, the interior dim compared to the fading daylight outside, and for a moment the space felt smaller than it should have, narrower, as if the air itself had tightened to fit the decision that had already been made. Alicia Monroe stepped forward without resistance, her movements controlled, deliberate, the faint sound of her shoes against the asphalt steady and unhurried. even as the flashing lights continued to ripple across the surface of the car in restless waves of color. And as she lowered herself into the back seat, the cool texture of the vinyl met her skin through the fabric of her clothing, grounding her in the physical reality of the moment without pulling her into it emotionally. The door closed behind her with a firm, final click, and the sound lingered for a second longer than expected, sealing off the outside world into muted fragments of light and motion, where voices became indistinct and movement reduced to silhouettes passing across the glass. Inside, the air was still, faintly carrying the scent of plastic and old paper, the kind of space designed for containment rather than comfort, and Alicia adjusted her posture slightly, her restrained hands resting calmly in her lap, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slow and even as she looked forward through the partition, not at the officers, not at the crowd, but at a fixed point somewhere beyond them, something steady, something unchanged. Outside the vehicle, Officer Brooks spoke briefly with the second officer, their figures partially obscured by the angle of the car, but their body language clear enough. Brooks firm, assured, his gestures short and decisive, while the second officer's stance remained less certain, his arms shifting slightly, his head tilting as if still trying to reconcile something that did not quite fit. A third figure had appeared now near the edge of the scene, a store employee standing just outside the automatic doors, watching with cautious curiosity, the glow from inside the building casting a soft rectangle of light onto the pavement that stretched toward the patrol car, but stopped just short of reaching it. Alicia's gaze drifted briefly to the side window where her reflection sat faintly against the layered movement of red and blue light, her face calm, composed, her expression unchanged, and in that reflection there was no panic, no urgency, only a quiet awareness, a stillness that came not from denial, but from understanding exactly where this moment would lead, even if those around her had not yet realized it. The faint crackle of a radio broke through the muted barrier as Brooks reached for the driver's side door, his voice carrying just enough to be heard in fragments. "Transporting now," he said. The words clipped, routine, and yet they carried the weight of something irreversible, something that had already crossed from question into action. The engine turned over with a low vibration that traveled through the frame of the vehicle, settling into a steady hum beneath everything else. And as the patrol car began to move, the parking lot shifted slowly past the window, rows of cars sliding by in quiet sequence, the everyday world continuing untouched just beyond the glass. Alicia remained still, her posture unchanged, her eyes forward, the rhythm of the car's motion blending with the quiet cadence of her breath. And for a moment, the scene felt suspended again, not in uncertainty this time, but in transition, moving from one space into another, from assumption into consequence. Brooks glanced briefly into the rearview mirror as they drove, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since she had been placed in the car. And there was something there, faint, almost imperceptible, not recognition, not yet, but a flicker of something unsettled, something that did not align with the certainty he had held just moments before. And he looked away quickly, his focus returning to the road ahead as if distance alone could maintain control over what was beginning to shift beneath the surface. The city unfolded around them in familiar patterns, streetlights beginning to glow one by one as the evening settled in, casting long reflections across the windshield, and Alicia let her gaze follow the movement of those lights, steady, predictable, each one illuminating a path forward that did not need to be forced, because it was already there, waiting, and in the quiet interior of the patrol car, surrounded by the soft hum of motion and the fading echoes of a moment that had already passed, she remained exactly as she had been from the start, composed, present, and unshaken, allowing the truth to move at its own pace. Knowing that when it arrived, it would not ask for attention, it would simply take its place, undeniable and complete. The patrol car slowed as it turned into the station lot, the tires rolling over a slight dip in the pavement that caused a gentle shift in the vehicle's motion, and the building ahead stood under the glow of overhead lights, its concrete exterior plain and functional, illuminated in a way that revealed everything and softened nothing, the kind of place designed for process, not reflection. Inside the car, Alicia Monroe remained still, her hands resting calmly in her lap, the faint hum of the engine settling into silence as the vehicle came to a complete stop. And for a moment, there was no movement, just the quiet weight of arrival, the transition from one space into another, from assumption into formal procedure. The front doors opened, then closed, the sound muted. Through the partition, and a second later, the rear door beside her unlocked with a soft mechanical click, followed by the door opening to let in a rush of cooler air that carried the scent of night settling in, crisp and steady. "Step out," Brooks said, his voice less sharp now, but still controlled, still anchored in routine, and Alicia complied without hesitation, stepping down onto the pavement with the same measured precision she had maintained from the beginning, her posture upright, her gaze forward, her presence unchanged despite the shift in setting. Inside the station, the lighting was bright and even, fluorescent panels stretching across the ceiling, casting a consistent white glow that erased shadows and left no room for ambiguity. And the soundscape changed as well, the low murmur of voices, the faint clatter of a keyboard, the distant ring of a phone, all blending into a steady rhythm of activity that continued regardless of who entered or why. Alicia was guided toward a desk near the front, the surface clean, organized, a computer monitor angled slightly toward the officer seated behind it, and Brooks placed her identification on the desk with a brief motion, his hand lingering for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary before pulling back. "We need to process this," he said, more to the room than to her, and the desk officer glanced up, his eyes moving quickly from Brooks to Alicia, then down to the identification card, his expression neutral at first, professional, routine, but as his gaze settled on the name, something shifted, subtle but immediate, his posture straightening slightly, his eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but in recognition. Alicia stood quietly, her hands still, her breathing even, the bright light reflecting softly off the surface of the desk, illuminating the edges of the card that now held more weight than it had just minutes before. And for a brief moment, the room seemed to slow, not in sound, not in motion, but in awareness, as if a small detail had just altered the shape of everything around it. The desk officer picked up the card, his thumb brushing lightly over the printed surface, his eyes scanning again, slower this time, more deliberate, and then he looked up at Alicia, really looked, his gaze meeting hers with a clarity that had not been present before. And in that exchange, there was no confusion, no assumption, only understanding arriving quietly, precisely where it was meant to. Brooks shifted slightly beside her, unaware of the change that had already begun to take place, his attention focused elsewhere, his stance still firm, still certain, and the second officer lingered just behind, his eyes moving between the desk officer and Alicia, sensing the shift without yet fully grasping it. The desk officer cleared his throat softly, a small, almost reflexive action, and turned the monitor slightly, typing a few keys with controlled precision, the sound of each keystroke distinct in the otherwise steady hum of the room. And as the system responded, the confirmation appeared not with noise, not with announcement, but with quiet certainty, a line of information that did not need to raise its voice to be understood. Alicia remained exactly as she had been, her posture composed, her expression calm, not watching the screen, not reacting to the moment as it unfolded, because she already knew what it would reveal, and the truth, when it arrived, did so without urgency, without force, simply taking its place in the space that had been waiting for it all along. The desk officer exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, and glanced once more at Brooks, the look brief but loaded with something that had not been there before, something that signaled a shift not just in information, but in consequence. And in that quiet exchange, the balance that had once seemed fixed began to tilt, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to change everything that would follow. The desk officer's fingers hovered for a fraction of a second above the keyboard, as if the system's confirmation had introduced a hesitation he had not anticipated, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, stripped of routine and replaced with something more careful, more deliberate. "Officer Brooks," he said, not loudly, but with enough weight to redirect attention, and Brooks turned slightly, his posture still firm, still anchored in the certainty he had carried from the parking lot. "What is it?" he asked, his tone clipped, expectant, and the desk officer angled the monitor just enough for Brooks to see. The glow of the screen reflecting faintly across his face as his eyes moved across the information, scanning once, then again, slower this time, as if the meaning had not immediately aligned with the expectation he had been holding on to. For a brief moment, nothing changed outwardly. No sudden reaction, no visible shift, but something subtle fractured beneath the surface, a small crack in the structure of certainty that had guided every decision up to this point. And Brooks's jaw tightened slightly, his gaze lingering on the name displayed before him. The title, the designation, each word carrying a weight that could not be dismissed or reinterpreted. The second officer stepped closer, his curiosity now overtaking his restraint, his eyes moving to the screen as well. And the moment he read it, his posture shifted in a way that was unmistakable, his shoulders lowering just slightly, his stance losing the rigidity it had held before, replaced by a quiet realization that settled into the space between them without needing to be spoken aloud. Alicia Monroe stood just a few feet away, exactly where she had been guided, her presence unchanged, her posture steady, her expression calm, and she did not look at the screen, did not need to, because the truth that had just been confirmed had never been absent for her. It had simply been unacknowledged by those around her. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, steady and indifferent, illuminating the moment with the same clarity they had offered everything else. And in that brightness, the shift became more visible, not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable, like a line that had quietly moved from one side to another. Without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, Brooks straightened slightly, his hand moving away from the edge of the desk, his eyes lifting from the screen to Alicia for the first time with something different behind them, not authority, not assumption, but a flicker of recognition mixed with something he had not yet named, and for a brief second, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if the weight of the moment had condensed into the space between them. "Ma'am," he began, the word unfamiliar in his voice, as if it had replaced something else he had been using without thinking, and he paused, the rest of the sentence not forming as easily as the ones before, because the ground beneath it had shifted, the context no longer supporting the structure he had been operating within. The desk officer cleared his throat again, this time more deliberately, his voice measured as he spoke. "Her identification is valid," he said, each word placed carefully, not just as information, but as confirmation of something that could no longer be overlooked, and the second officer stepped back slightly, creating a small but noticeable distance, as if instinctively adjusting to the new reality that had just taken shape. Alicia finally allowed her gaze to lift fully, meeting Brooks's eyes with the same calm steadiness she had maintained from the beginning, not accusatory, not triumphant, simply present. And in that look, there was no need for explanation, no need for emphasis, because everything that needed to be understood was already there. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, dense with realization, with consequence, with the quiet unraveling of a moment that had been built on assumption rather than fact. And as Brooks stood there, the reflection of the monitor still faintly visible in his eyes, the certainty he had carried began to dissolve, not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that could not be reversed, because once the truth had been seen, it could not be unseen, and the path forward would no longer follow the direction he had chosen, but the one that had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like something heavy being moved just out of sight, and Officer Brooks stood there for a moment longer than necessary, his posture no longer rigid in the same way, his shoulders slightly lowered, his stance less certain, as if the structure he had relied on had quietly dissolved beneath him. The desk officer reached forward with careful hands, placing Alicia Monroe's identification back onto the desk with a precision that carried a different kind of respect now, not performative, not exaggerated, just present, and the faint sound of the card touching the surface seemed louder than it should have. Marking the moment in a way that no words could, Brooks exhaled slowly, his breath controlled, but heavier than before, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the shift that had taken place inside him. "Ma'am," he said again, this time without hesitation, the word landing differently in the room, no longer a correction, but an acknowledgement, and he paused briefly before continuing, as if measuring each word before allowing it to exist. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. The sentence careful, deliberate, but incomplete in a way that left its weight suspended between them. Alicia did not move immediately, her hands still, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady as it met his. And in that moment, the difference between them was no longer defined by position or control, but by clarity, by who had understood the situation from the beginning and who was only now beginning to see it. The second officer shifted again, stepping back just slightly, creating more space, his eyes lowering for a brief second before returning to neutral, the quiet recognition settling into his posture without needing to be spoken. Brooks glanced toward the desk officer, then back to Alicia, as if searching for the correct path forward in a situation that no longer followed the one he had chosen, and his hand moved toward the restraints, not abruptly, not hurriedly, but with a measured caution that reflected the change in context, and as they were removed, the small metallic sound that followed felt different from before, no longer marking control, but release. Alicia brought her hands forward slowly, not rubbing her wrists, not reacting outwardly, simply returning them to a natural position at her sides, her composure intact, her presence unchanged, and the room seemed to adjust around that stillness, the fluorescent light reflecting softly off the desk, the background noise continuing its steady rhythm as if nothing had happened, even though everything had shifted. "You are free to go," Brooks said, the words formal, but quieter now, stripped of the certainty they would have carried earlier, and Alicia inclined her head slightly, not in gratitude, not in dismissal, but in acknowledgement, the kind that closed one moment without opening another. She reached for her identification, her fingers steady as she took it from the desk, the simple action carrying more weight than the movement itself, and for a second, her gaze dropped to the card before lifting again, meeting Brooks's eyes one last time, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm that held something deeper, something that did not need to be expressed to be understood. Brooks held that gaze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the realization to settle fully, and then he looked away, his posture shifting again, this time not out of authority, but out of awareness, the kind that comes too late to change what has already been done. Alicia turned without another word, her steps measured as she moved toward the exit, the sound of her shoes against the polished floor soft but steady, each step carrying her further from the moment that had tried to define her and into the space that had always been hers. The automatic doors opened with a quiet mechanical sound, letting in the cool evening air, and as she stepped outside, the city moved as it always did, streetlights glowing, cars passing, the ordinary world continuing without pause, and Alicia Monroe walked forward into that light, her silhouette steady, her presence unchanged, leaving behind a room that was still adjusting to a truth it had not been ready to see. The night air settled around Alicia Monroe as she stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool breeze brushing gently against her face, carrying with it the distant hum of the city that never paused, never asked questions, never waited for explanations. And for a moment she stood still beneath the soft glow of a streetlight, its pale yellow circle stretching across the concrete at her feet, grounding her in a space that felt both ordinary and quietly significant. The police station door closed behind her with a muted click, sealing away the fluorescent brightness, the murmured voices, the shifting tension that still lingered inside, and ahead of her, the street extended in long, steady lines, cars passing at a measured pace, headlights gliding across the asphalt like silent witnesses to a story they would never fully know. She adjusted the sleeve of her jacket slightly, a small, natural movement, her hands steady, her posture unchanged, the same calm presence that had carried her through. Every moment now returning to its natural rhythm, no longer confined by walls or expectation, just existing as it always had, quiet and certain. Across the street, a traffic light shifted from red to green, the soft mechanical click barely audible beneath the sound of engines accelerating forward, and Alicia began to walk, her steps even, deliberate, the sound of her shoes against the pavement soft but consistent, each step moving her further away from what had happened and deeper into what had always been hers to begin with. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass windows she passed, offering brief glimpses of her silhouette as she moved, steady, composed, unshaken, and in those reflections, there was no trace of the moment that had tried to redefine her, no imprint of assumption or misjudgment, only the quiet strength of someone who had never needed to prove her place, only to stand in it. Somewhere behind her, inside the station, the weight of realization continued to settle, conversations shifting tone, perspectives adjusting in ways that could not be undone. But Alicia did not look back, not out of dismissal, but because the moment no longer belonged to her. It had moved on, just as she had. A car passed slowly beside the curb, its headlights briefly illuminating her path before continuing on, and the light caught the edge of something in her hand, the simple identification she had reclaimed, its surface reflecting just enough to remind her of the quiet power it held, not because of the title it carried, but because of the truth it represented, a truth that had never needed to be raised, only recognized. She reached the corner and paused for a second, the crosswalk signal counting down in bright white numbers, steady, predictable, and as it shifted, she stepped forward again, moving with the same calm certainty that had defined every moment before, her presence aligned with something deeper than circumstance, something rooted, unshaken. The world around her continued as it always did, unaware of the shift that had taken place, unaware of the line that had been crossed and then redrawn. But that did not matter, because not every truth needed an audience. Not every moment required acknowledgement to be real. And as Alicia Monroe walked beneath the quiet rhythm of the city lights, her figure steady against the moving backdrop, there was no need for words, no need for explanation, only the quiet, undeniable presence of justice settling into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the stillness that followed, where everything that needed to be understood already was.